My dad had a funny little saying, "You canna pass what's afore ye." And that's what this is about. Now, my dad was a World War II veteran. He lived in the Veterans Center at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. And I had written this little essay last February 2021 as a tribute to him. But he has since passed. Nevertheless, I'm going to read this exactly as I wrote it back then, and I will share with you a few end notes. And of course, this is called "You Canna Pass What's Afore Ye." So, during my earliest years of discovery, I was forever bewildered by disjointed glimpses of my dad's boyhood, our Scottish relatives, and his part in World War II. Search for enlightenment was akin to chasing rainbows. Asking questions like, "What did you do in the war, Dad?" often resulted in, "Never mind, just go about your own business." Kind of harsh words for little kids' ears. But half a lifetime later, a breakthrough came in the form of a box of vintage photographs my sister and I stumbled upon while cleaning our parents' basement. It cracked the seal of silence. Afternoon teas then followed with my dad and his one remaining sibling, who was at the time 96. Scanning old photos, identifying names, places, and recording anecdotal accounts of family mischief triggered both laughter and a release of unexpressed grief. A grief linked to my father's profound loss of innocence at a very young age while serving in the Canadian Merchant Navy from 1939 to 1944. Stories that had been on pause unleashed tears, light-hearted remarks, and sobs of gratitude. I was one of the lucky ones he choked. Though not completely unscathed, he had returned home with all of his limbs intact. It's taken decades to comprehend the measure of the man I call Dad. That old saying, "When the going gets tough, the tough get going," that comes to mind. It's a custom fit for him. At the tender age of 17 summers and the bravado of youth, he chose the war he was going to fight rather than let it choose him. He did not wait for conscription, and for that, he received the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal. He recounts, "Was I scared? Hell yes, but when you're that young, you're full of bluster and you think you're infallible." Though he's talking about the past, modern day images of children as young as 12 years old armed with AK-47s sweep through my gray matter. For a breath or two, I cannot speak. The world is still at war, and it just seems to get crueler and worse. And when we think it can't get worse in this modern day, it does get worse. So, for a breath or two, I can't speak. He continues, "My mom, my sisters, and their husbands saw me off. At the time, their husbands were too old to be conscripted and were full of suffocating advice. Little did I know that the mortality rate amongst merchant seamen in World War II was as high as, if not higher than, in any other armed forces. I felt lonely walking up the gangplank. It was a far cry from all of that Hollywood anchors away stuff, but I'll tell you one thing, He goes on, I knew the first moment I met your mother at a CNR dance that she was the one. He refers to a period when he'd been staying at a manning pool in Montreal awaiting sail. I ponder. So, the sailor really did get the girl of his dreams. My dad sailed the park ships, named after local and national parks of Canada. Those ships sailed in convoys accompanied by armed warships for protection. Merchant seamen were considered civilians, had no knowledge of cargo contents, nor had they combat training. In retrospect, and shaking his head, we just had one gunner aboard our ship. And me, I just did what I had to do as a seaman, fireman, greaser, and trimmer. Fodder for stories 4 other times. It didn't take long to figure out we were prime targets for enemy fire. He grimaces. We felt like we were part of some damn duck hunt. Better yet, sitting ducks. Well, in the year 2000, the Canadian government finally recognized merchant seamen for the important role they played in World War II, transporting desperately needed supplies all over the world. By that time, my dad had traveled 80 years through life and was just as surprised as the rest of the family when he not only received a monetary award for his service, but also 5 medals as a testament to his volunteerism and sticking with it from beginning to end. When asked about active enemy engagements, he recalls being in his altogether below decks when the washhand basin was blown clear off the wall. He recounts, the captain decided to hold a gunnery drill in the middle of the Atlantic. The crazy fool might just as well have made a public announcement both above and below water of our whereabouts. Luckily, my ships were never fired on. Must have had an angel on your shoulder, I say, given the mortality rate for the merchant navy. We both chuckle for inexplicable reasons, if only to acknowledge that was a close call. Somehow we land on that well-worn expression, ships that pass in the night, and how it originated. I connect it to a Longfellow poem. For my dad, it twigs yet another memory. You know, hell came to your grandmother's door in the early days. I was already 6 months out to sea when the RCMP came a-knocking at her door. She thought they were delivering a death notice, and they thought I'd avoided conscription, not realizing I'd already enlisted and sailed. We were like ships that had passed in the night. There it is again. And I'll tell you another one, he chuckles. He goes on to describe how his dad worked in the shipyards on the Clyde and earned the nickname the fastest caulker on the Clyde. Caulking being the process of rendering seams on a ship watertight. As the story goes, my grandpa Dempster used to pay off scaffolders to stay just a little ahead of him so that he never had any downtime. Eventually, he emigrated to Canada, returning with my grandmother to Greenock, Scotland, just once. Apparently, his shipyard cronies had strung a huge banner across the yard which read, "Will ye no come back again, Bobby Dempster?" With a grin, I think aloud, a fine tribute, but I'm wondering which they missed most, Grandpa Dempster or the extra payola. He's deep in thought. He's trying to remember dates, wanting to tell me how when his parents were visiting the old country, They were supposed to have returned to Canada on the SS Athenia. But the winds of change, the winds of war, caused your grandmother and grandfather to cut their visit short, he says. They left Scotland 1 week earlier than planned on an alternate ship. When the Athenia did set sail, it was torpedoed just after leaving Scotland and sunk by a German U-boat. I exhale. Well, there are ships that pass in the night, and sadly those that no longer see the light of day. They're simply ghostly images of what once was and what might have been. Granny must have had the second sight in deciding to switch ships for an earlier passage back to Canada. In lighter moments, he sports a large tattoo on his forearm of a lady simply draped in a towel and standing on a star. He likes to brag that he paid only $2.50 for it in Auckland, New Zealand. Well, everybody in the family knew that story, and the response was always overwhelmingly the same. Well said by a true Scot who likes to get his money's worth. One New Year's Eve spent aboard ship with his mates included daring one another to dive into the frigid Scapa Flow. The Scapa Flow being a body of water in the Orkney Islands, Scotland, and a chief naval base during the First and Second World Wars. Britain can take it was a favorite expression of my Granny Dempster, and indeed a response to her son's New Year's Eve folly. A decorated World War II merchant, my dad committed to truth and righteousness at a very young age. Later in life, he remained steadfast, looking after his blind wife, Priscilla, my biological mother, administering her diabetes injections well into his 88th year. He became a bachelor at 89 when she died of lung cancer on May 1st, 2011, after almost 65 years of marriage. Throughout his profound grief and longing, he'd sobbed, "She was a saint for sticking by me through good times and bad." He eventually found solace in the belief that they would reunite in the afterlife, and this has been so reflected at their shared gravesite and marker, intertwined hearts with the inscription, "Forever Together," awaiting his own epitaph. For 40 years following the war, he worked arduous hours at the TTC, the Toronto Transit Commission, simply doing what he had to do to house and feed a growing family. Lack of communication with his children about his younger years and his abrupt personality made him seem harsh and unapproachable at times. He tried to run his household like a ship, with no room for mistakes and no appeasement for hurt feelings or tears. Now, clocking in at his 99th year, I finally understand that provocative questions coming from a child, questions like, "What did you do in the war, Dad?" do not come from a place of empathy and knowledge, but from a place of innocence that needs to be protected. Such questions can also tap a raw nerve and stab the heart into silence. Only the fullness of time can soften heart edges, breach the silence, and trigger the kind of tears and memories that bring relief. And so I've pieced together a collage of those memories, to offer back to him as a gift as he now struggles with the strictures of dementia and resides in the Veterans Wing of Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. I'm thinking, will he remember our conversations tomorrow once yesterday's gone? Periodically, he drifts to a place that neither I nor his caregivers can fathom. I grieve for his loss of self, but I am grateful for that which I've managed to help him preserve. My brain gets jabbed into high alert whenever I receive phone calls from the good nurses at Sunnybrook. I hold my breath. I feel relief at no critical injuries, but we must report all falls. That produces an ache in my throat and watery vision. I am haunted by what has come to feel like a death watch as I witness his diminishing mobility and memory loss. Much gratitude goes out to cousins and friends who visit and share their thoughts with him of both the past and the present, and to the crew of nurses and caregivers helping us to help him navigate uncharted waters. Familiar shores are engulfed in mist and quickly fading. For him, some of the simplest acts of daily living can no longer be taken for granted. I do believe that film star Bette Davis had it right when she quoted, "Old age ain't no place for sissies." My visceral reaction to the Sunnybrook patient care call displays on my phone is, of course, rooted in that which cannot be denied, that we are all on different timelines and at various stages of both living and dying. As my dad would say, "You canna pass what's afore ye." Now, as an end note, I wrote this wee essay back in February 2021 as a tribute to my dad. He has since passed, so I've added this. My dad succumbed to old age on March 20th, 2021, just 52 days shy of his 99th birthday. Thankfully, I had just visited with him 3 days prior on St. Patrick's Day. In spite of him being somewhat distant and distracted, we managed to share a good laugh or two, hoping for better days and the loosening of COVID visiting restrictions. On March 20th, we connected via video call around the supper hour and were struggling with an unstable Wi-Fi connection again. And so we agreed to chat after supper via landline, via telephone. I received a phone call around 6:40 p.m. from his nurse, who found him asleep in his chair. The big sleep.